sometimes we're harder on ourselves than other people.
Yes.
That's
All the
something I've
time.
that's something I've learned and I'm still learning, you know.
Yes,
Whatever we do that's important to us, there's always going to be a little bit of fear.
that is true.
Mm.
That is true. Wow. So, all right. Let's let's begin. I'm just gonna give a quick introduction, and then we'll. I don't know if you've ever listened to our podcast or not.
No, I haven't. I didn't know you had a podcast.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, basically, we've been doing it a series on issues as they come up, so we did something for the election, we did something for Georgia, where we talked to Georgia voters overseas and in Georgia, and also activists in Georgia too. We did Right now we're working on Black History Month, and so this is for Women's History Month. And um yeah, so it's going to be great. You're very admirable, at least to me you are. I Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
yeah, you've worked in government, in diplomacy at a high level, and I think that's really great.
Well, not such a high level, but official. You know how the foreign
Right.
service and civil services. The rankings, individual rankings, but the jobs I've done have been at times senior. At those levels. Yeah.
Right. Okay, all right, so here we go.
Okay.
All right. Welcome to the Global Black Caucus Power to the People podcast. I'm Angela Fobbs, chair of the Global Black Caucus, and today this is the start of our new series on women's history, Hidden Figures. So our first guest for this is Lynn Keeys. She currently resides in South Africa. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you very much, Angela. Appreciate
Um,
being here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. You are definitely, for me, an admirable woman, and you've done so much with your life, and it seems to be so interesting. I just thought that the world should hear this too. Definitely, I think there's a lot of women who have worked in a lot of different fields that are sort of trailblazers, but not the pioneer per se, but still early enough that you're overcoming a lot of barriers. And I think you're a great representative for this, and a good model for women of all ages, even
Thank
myself.
you.
So yeah, because you and other people like you give me strength, like to keep going on. Because sometimes the world feels a little demotivating.
Yes, it can be.
Yes, it seems a little bit demotivating sometimes, but we're not gonna be undermotivated. We're gonna go forward and be strong. So let's start with your early life. You've done so many interesting things. Can you just give me like a brief overview of your career, and then we'll delve into the various parts of it.
Okay. My career. All right, that's interesting. Actually, I've worked in international development, and that career was really inspired by just growing up. I just had this thing about the world and the different people in the world, the different cultures. And somehow in Philadelphia, growing up in Philadelphia, I just attracted people from other places. I don't know why. I would walk down the street and people even ask me, "Where are you from?" I mean, when I was 12 years old, they asked me where I was from. Okay. But I my long track career started with the U.S. Agency for International Development. But prior to that, I worked on some other jobs um, that were giving me exposure to the international development field. Briefly at Johns Hopkins University on a USAID project, but I wasn't working at the level that I wanted to work in, because initially what I wanted to do was development communication. How do you use communication to help change behaviors, to um, prove well-being, etc. Communication in its various forms, and the media as well. So I joined USAID in 1984 after a number of years of struggling trying to make it into the field. I got my master's, my undergraduate degree is in communication, and my minor was in Latin American studies.
Oh, wow.
And my focus in communications was really international communications, and that was encouraged by a course I took in journalism that focused on the use of communication in developing countries. And the book I read was Muffled Drums by William Hatchkins. I still remember that book. It was about largely how communication was used in Africa for liberation struggles. And from there, I didn't even know there was such a field called international development until I was in the communication program. And then it kind of developed from there. And then I had a friend in school who had a similar interest. And she went to, and then I got involved in the Latin American Studies program. Had a great mentor. At the time, I didn't really understand mentorships per se, but he was a great mentor. Traveled to Latin America a couple of times, spent studies tours in Colombia especially. Love Colombia. Very interested in the African diaspora in Latin America and spent a lot of time studying that. But after graduate school, took a couple of years before I could get into USAID. In fact, the first time I applied for their entry-level program, I did not get in. It was disappointing, but I didn't get in. But someone told me where I was working, made some suggestions as to how I could better prepare myself. And this is something growing up, a lot of young women of color, African-American, Hispanic, or whatever, they don't have the network. We don't have the network. Right. At least back then, we did not have the network, especially when you're talking about something like international.
Yes.
I mean, most of my friends could not understand why I wanted to leave the country to do this work, because their perspective was, look, we have a struggle here. You should be staying here with the struggle. But in my mind, it sounded like plantation politics. You're on a plantation, keep your nose in the plantation, your business is nowhere else. But I'm thinking like, the world is big and the struggles are huge. And I wanted to see the world. I wanted to experience other cultures. I wanted to be part of making an impact elsewhere as well, which also has its ripple effect here. Okay.
That's right.
So I didn't really have mentors, but there was a woman who worked with me when I was at Johns Hopkins University. Really nice woman. She was from the UK. And I'm gonna have to tell you something, even in that job, I had blocks. I have to tell you, in the international development field back then, I can't tell you everything now. There were not a lot of African Americans in that field. And a lot of people didn't look at you as quote unquote, really, I don't know if they thought you had the right to be there, but they did not try to open any doors for you or make it easier. But this woman from the UK, she really mentored me in many ways and made some suggestions as to how I could figure out the best way to present myself. Because back then, to get into USAID, you had to have Peace Corps. Now that's a story in and of itself, okay? Mm. When I went to Colombia, I was there twice, but the second time I was there, it was longer term. I met a former Peace Corps volunteer who was one of the first volunteers in Colombia in 1968. We developed a friendship. I wanted to move to Colombia after I finished my bachelor's degree. So we were staying in touch. He had an artisan shop and he was giving me all these tips for jobs all over Colombia teaching English. And my Spanish was pretty decent back then. So when I graduated and when I mentioned that to my father, he flipped. I'm from West Philadelphia. Yeah. My father is a person, interestingly enough, very grounded, West Philadelphia. He taught us to see the world. This is the interesting thing. He taught us to see the world and to go beyond our four corners. But the idea of his daughter moving to another country was like,
yes.
And
see
he said,
the world.
No.
Don't go out there.
Don't go out there, right?
Yeah.
No. He said no. And I just didn't have any wherewithal within me to go against him and do it. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of myself. And this happened, and then I applied for Peace Corps, and it was a perfect job. It was a job working in communication in Latin America. I can't remember which. And I mentioned it to him, and it was a firm no. I've gone this journey trying to build the confidence to go forward. But with US aid, the expectation was you'd have to have a Peace Corps background. And Peace Corps is a great experience. I know a lot of people who are Peace Corps volunteers, but there's a wrong assumption that because someone is in Peace Corps, that they're able to operate in a cross-cultural environment. Okay. Because unfortunately, I have to say, as much as I admire Peace Corps volunteers, I've met a lot of Peace Corps volunteers who are not changed individuals after having
Really?
had the experience in terms of multiracial, multicultural environment. They still carry the same racial attitudes, unfortunately.
Oh, that is a
And I
shame.
experienced that even 12, 15 years ago in Lesotho, where there was a Black American Peace Corps volunteer who, in the Peace Corps ceremony, actually read a poem that she wrote about how it's not that the volunteers have shown negative attitudes toward the people they work with. This is in relationship to our own home environment in the US. There's a separation. You can handle Africans, but when it comes to dealing with African Americans, pretty much people keep, many ways, keep the same negative mindset. Okay. And she wrote a poem about it that was quite insightful. And at that graduation, a lot of people were very upset that she had the nerve to even say it. But that's a side story, okay? In the
No, when
international
it's
world, okay. But it inspires me to meet people in USAID and to get some information. But then also there was the person who was the project manager in USA for the project that I worked on, who was also very helpful to me. So there were people behind the scenes that I didn't even know who were moving me forward. Okay. You know, sometimes you can have mentors and supporters you don't know. Okay. And you have to acknowledge them at some point. But I did join, that's a little side story for people, you know, but get to meet people, know people, ask them questions. A lot of times we're afraid to because we don't think we know enough to ask.
right.
But sometimes asking is just opening the door for people to see that you're interested and they can then provide you with information that you will need. They don't necessarily open the door for you, but they give you the information that enables you to
Yeah,
open the
get the
door
door
yourself.
open. Yeah,
Yourself, yes, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So I joined USAID in '84. I thought I was going to Latin America because that's the place on my application. I put Brazil, though I had never been to Brazil, but very important part of the African diaspora. But then having the wanderlust that I had, I said Brazil, but then I said I'll go anywhere.
Mm.
They sent me to Swaziland. I didn't even
Oh,
know
wow.
Swaziland. Oh, Eswatini now it's called Swaziland. I didn't even know what Swaziland it was at the time. But that just after that, I've worked in quite a few countries. I worked initially in Swaziland, and while I was there, I worked in Mozambique. That was during the Civil War.
Ooh.
In USA, we had food aid programs and we had a commodity import program to bring in farming implements. You know, the agricultural sector in Mozambique had collapsed during the war. There was really very little food. Okay. So we brought in farm implements. We would auction them to companies who would then supply them to cooperative farms in Mozambique. And I really had a chance to experience Mozambique in a very profound way because during the Civil War, I was able to travel to certain areas to visit the farmers where people with the embassy, even in Mozambique at the time, could not travel because they couldn't travel outside of Maputo, but I could travel because of the program itself. I had to be
Mhm.
able to talk to the farmers.
Wow.
So yeah, that was really great. Then from there, I tried to go to Asia or the Latin America, could never get in there. But then I was asked to apply to Sudan. And at the time, Sudan was a danger post because an American had gotten shot. The families weren't allowed. I was single. And I said, well, can I go see it? So they sent me to Khartoum for a week. And while I was working in Mozambique on assignment, our executive officer sent me an email and said, "You've been assigned to Sudan. Do you want to protest?"
Oh, wow.
I said, "No, I'll go. I never, it's interesting. I'll go." And it's a place I love. Well, Sudan, that was before it was two countries. I worked in the north. I worked primarily in Darfur, a lot in Darfur. I was based in Khartoum, but I traveled all over the country except the south. You couldn't travel in the south unless you actually had work there. And then from there, I also again tried to go to Asia
Hmm.
and didn't get there. Ended up in Ghana.
Oh,
In Ghana, actually, is where I met my husband, though he's not from Ghana. Um, and I have to say, Sudan was an interesting experience. It's an amazing place. The people are amazing, though the internal, I would say, family problems almost. Okay. People think of Sudan as not an African country, but as
why?
someone I don't know, because they speak Arabic, because people have certain Arab, and that's not just Arab actually, because the Arab world in many ways don't consider Sudanese really Arab, but Northern Sudanese. But as one MPLA, the not MPLA, sorry, the Sudanese Liberation Movement leader said, was that they're either an Africanized Arabs or Arabized Africans in Sudan at the time. Okay. So, and there are a lot of influences from colonialism. I mean, from all the Mediterranean countries, Greece, Turkey, um, of course, the British are there, and there is mixing, okay. But the Sudanese people are the Sudanese people, and they're part of Africa. But because of the language and the religion, they're also viewed as part of the Arab world. But this is just my personal opinion. I have quite a few Sudanese friends. I was accepted very well in their families. I really love Sudan. And I
Wow.
learned conversational Arabic, which I have lost since then because I haven't been able to use it. From there, I went to Ghana, which was amazing. I actually met President Rawlings at the time. I have a picture of him with me.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's an amazing picture. Yeah. And I was there for the reinterment of Kwame Nkrumah. When President Nkrumah died, he was not given a state funeral. So I think it was 1992, they built this new memorial in Accra, and there was an official ceremony. In fact, Betty Shabazz was there. There was a whole delegation there, and I met Betty Shabazz as well.
Wow.
That was an amazing day. I've met some interesting people in my life. Okay, but I'm
Yeah.
just kind of doing a tour
Yes,
for the
I love
moment.
it. I was just
Yeah,
thinking, where are we going next? Like, you
yeah.
didn't stay in Ghana forever, so
Well, no, I came back to the States for 4 years when I had my son. I also got married, and from there, I went to Abidjan. I was in the regional office, and while I was there, I worked in Mali and Benin, and did quite a bit of traveling. I've traveled, I think, in about 35 African countries.
wow.
Traveled or lived in about 35 African countries, north, east, west, and south. Um, so it's been an amazing experience. But I have to tell you about Ghana because a lot of people talk about their Nelson Mandela moments. I had an almost, it was my moment. I shouldn't say an almost moment. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison, okay, the first foreign trip he took was to Ghana because Ghana, the West African countries, as well as the frontline states in Southern Africa, provided tremendous support to the exiles. The first trip he made was to Ghana, and there was an official presentation at the National Cultural Center, and it was by invitation. I didn't have one, but I left the office and I told myself, I'm getting in here. Because when I was in Swaziland, I had quite a few friends in South Africa. I failed to mention that. I did go to South Africa a few times.
Lynn?
You, but should I keep talking or? Yeah,
Yeah. I just
yeah.
somehow, one of us, probably me, got unstable. So sorry.
Yeah, yeah. When I was in Swaziland, I had a lot of friends in South Africa, And I said, I was criticized by that by some of my friends, not all, because they felt you shouldn't go in at all. But I lived in Swaziland and I have friends in South Africa and I would go visit there. I went into the townships. I spent time with them. And though I also had colleagues, this is a time when Ambassador Perkins was the ambassador in South Africa, first Black ambassador there. I had colleagues who were going to South Africa regularly, but they were going and patronizing the non quote unquote international establishments that were only accepting whites. And up to that point, I hadn't been. And I remember they would come back and say, oh, you should go to the Wild Coast. I said, what is the Wild Coast? Oh, it's beautiful beachfront. You should go. I said, but where do you stay? Oh, there are these little B&Bs you can stay in. But that was code in
Yeah.
some sense, because the little B&Bs were not open to Black people, okay? Or they would go to the private game parks in Kruger. This actually was happening. And Ambassador Perkins, or they go to the opera in Johannesburg. Now, as a diplomat with a diplomatic passport, I could have presented my diplomatic passport and I could have been honorary white to get into those places, but I never did that. Okay.
Honorary
Yeah.
white.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
maybe
There were
elaborate
Black.
on that?
Well, look, in South Africa at the time, if you had a diplomatic passport, officially, if you were in these establishments, I'm not suggesting that little B&B because they wouldn't let you in for anything, but I'm talking like opera houses
Right, the bigger
or
places.
plays, bigger places where, yeah, you could get in. But Ambassador Perkins eventually sent a memo to all of the embassies in the frontline states surrounding South Africa that under no circumstances are you to patronize establishments that were segregated. Okay. But after having been there for about, I don't know, several months, I had a very good Swazi friend, and she and I decided we were going to drive there together because we had friends there that I had met through her, and we were going to drive there. And what did I do? We set out at 4:30 in the afternoon. I don't know how that happened because it gets dark at like 6:30,
Wow.
and the drive is 4 hours nonstop. We got into Joburg actually at 9:30 at night, but we did stop at a gas petrol station along the way, and it was like it said whites only, blacks only. Okay, I have a picture of that. Yeah,
Wow. Wow. You
yeah.
know, that I know, I mean, I know a lot about the whole South African, struggle for Black people to have equal rights there. But even just hearing about it is just seems so like
That's
a gas
yeah.
station. Come on.
That's the
Like,
lightweight part of it, just the signs. But the reason I detoured back to Swaziland, that experience, because I wanted to say something about Nelson Mandela and his visit to Ghana. I made my way into that hall. Don't ask me how I did it. I presented myself and I used the fact that I worked for USAID. So they let me in.
mm.
But people, and the place was packed. People kept shoving me and escorting me up to the front. They didn't know who I was. I don't know. And they kept saying, oh no, you should go up front. You should go up front. You should go up front. I think they thought I was South African, maybe. But that didn't make sense because most people in Ghana thought I was Ghanaian. Okay. I don't know if it was the environment or was it God working in his invisible hand. I don't know. But I ended up in the first row.
Oh, wow.
The first row. No ticket, no invitation, first row. At the end, Madiba stayed on the stage. I didn't leave right away. I just sat there. And a guard came over and asked me if I were South African. And I said no. And he just looked at me. I looked at him. And then they escorted, because they were waiting to escort him off the stage. And I thought, Lynn, you're so stupid. You should have said, oh, I've lived in South Africa. Can I meet, Mr. Mandela? I didn't do that. But that was the closest I've ever gotten to. But I have met Bishop Tutu though before.
That's pretty close. I
But
mean,
that's pretty close.
that's closer than
The
most
thing is,
people.
he saw me. To me, that's most important. He
Mhm.
saw me and asked about me. And, to me, that is precious,
Yes.
very precious. But from Ghana, I went back to the States for 4 years. And in fact, I worked on the Southern Africa regional program. So I did a lot of work with the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and worked on a number of projects. My specialty working with USAID was in project development. And I led a lot of multi-discipline teams in developing the projects, the project plans, et cetera, before they would be contracted out. And then I did a lot of program and portfolio management. So I did a lot of work in developing the regional program in Southern Africa. And I used to attend the SADC meetings, the Southern Africa Development Community meeting. Well, before it was a community, it was the Southern African Development Coordination Conference. But after South Africa was liberated, it became a community with the whole objective of becoming a community, which hasn't quite happened yet. And that's what we're looking at for the full continent. You know, Kwame Nkrumah's dream of African, a community of African nations. Yes. And hopefully we'll move in that direction. But after I came back to the States for 4 years and worked on that, I moved to Abidjan, to Cote d'Ivoire. I worked there, and that was a regional office. So I worked in Senegal, Mali, and a number of other places in Benin. Then after that, I moved to Benin, worked there for almost 4 years. Then my husband, who was working with the UN Development Program, he was in Abidjan with me, but when I got transferred when our office closed. He could not get transferred to Benin, so he worked in Nigeria. So we did the commute between Cotonou and Lagos with kids. I worked there. That was interesting. The go slows, because we go by road. I go by road with the kids. And then he got transferred to Lesotho, and I took a leave of absence and went there for 2 years. Then I came back to Washington, and I worked in the strategy division of our policy office. Then I took my early retirement because I just was not able to coordinate assignments. The US government coordinates assignments if your spouse works with another government agency, but my spouse worked for the UN.
Oh, okay.
So there was they made no effort to try to coordinate the assignment. So I eventually made the decision to leave.
Oh, what year was that?
That was 2005.
Wow.
But people were shocked when I did it because I was also offered the role as head of the strategy division. When I was leaving, they wanted to give me that role, but I told them I had made that decision, which would sound crazy, but at the time it was really putting family over my job. But the 2-year leave of absence, I think, gave me a bit of confidence, and that I realized that I could do other things other than, work with USAID. Most people, when they go into foreign service, they stay in it till the end of the time when they have to retire, actually. And then USA did a lot of positive things for me. I've seen so much of the world, okay? Not just in Africa, because I worked primarily in Africa, but when I was in Washington, I also covered Latin America and Eastern Europe too, my last assignment. But I also took the opportunity, like so many other people, to go other places. But when I came back, interestingly enough, when I was in Washington for that last year, I wanted to do a master's in dealing with strategy and stuff. And I had to find a program that I could easily handle while working. And that's when I came upon project management, though I was doing project management all along, but I didn't know it was actually a discipline that one could study. So then I started to take though I've had 20 plus more years of experience in the area, I said, well, let me start taking some courses to see what this is about. Because I had talked to Villanova University, they had an online program, and I was interested in strategy. And they said, well, why don't you do the certificate? Well, actually, it started because I was going to do a graduate certificate in organizational leadership that included strategy, but then you had to take 2 other classes, and one of them was project management, okay? And so I took it, and then from there, I got a graduate certificate in it, and then I got certified by the Project Management Institute, which is a process in and of itself. It's a professional project management certification. And And then I left the States to come back to the Lesotho, where I lived for 7 years in
Wow.
Lesotho, and then moved to South Africa, where I am. This is a long story. I can be a long storyteller, so cut me short
No, well, you know
if I
what?
talk too much.
No, this is an excellent story. But I want to go back to the beginning. Um, when you were a little girl, what did you imagine your life would be like?
Okay, I can tell you, I grew up, there's 7 kids in my family, okay?
Wow.
And I shared the bedroom with 2 of my sisters. I don't think I ever had a bedroom of my own until I was 25.
Oh my God.
Okay. But we were all very close. That's when I moved to my own apartment. And I never thought anything about it. Okay. But the reason I mentioned that is that when everyone was downstairs, I would go up into the room. I think I was about 10 or so. And I would close the Venetian blinds so that the sun would come in streaks, like little rays coming in. And I'd lay on the bed, my hands behind my head, and just sit there and dream with my eyes open. I don't think I had specific places in my head, but I was going places. I don't
Mm.
think I could put a name to any country, but I knew my mind was going other places because I was just interested in the world and I was always wondering what it would be, what I could be. I didn't have a specific in my head. At one time, I wanted to be a lawyer. Okay. And we used to play court at home. My mom was a judge, I was the defense attorney. We loved Perry Mason.
Oh my gosh.
So someone else would be the prosecutor. And another thing is, I remember asking my mom often for sheets of paper and a pencil so I could write my autobiography. Now, that's really weird because I never did. But I used to say, Mom, I want to write my story, my autobiography. Okay, Lynn, here, do you have paper and pen here? And I would start writing something, but I never kept anything that continued. But for some reason, those are the 2 things that stood in my mind. That, and then of course, growing up, this is very traditional African American. It grows out of our experience in the United States. And it's very similar in South Africa. And I realized that growing up, a solid career for a woman would be a nurse or a teacher.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that is
Those
true.
were solid careers. And our parents would say, well, why don't you become a teacher? Why don't you become a nurse? No one ever said, become a doctor. There's nothing wrong with being a nurse and a teacher. They're great professions, but those were solid professions because those were professions we were allowed to practice in our
Yes.
own communities. And you see the same thing in South Africa too. Lots of teachers and nurses. Okay. So, but I still had this thing about the world. And then as I got older into high school, I have to tell you that experience. Okay, I grew up in West Philadelphia, primarily Black neighborhood. It had been a German neighborhood, but German people started to move out in the 50s. My parents bought their house right after I was born. And I had 2 neighbors who were German, Mr. Schweitzer and Mrs. McGovern, Miss Amy. They were brother and sister. They lived together, very kind people. But the school I went to it was a Catholic school. My father was Catholic. My mother became Catholic. And I have to say this too, which is unusual. I grew up in the same neighborhood that both my parents grew up in.
Wow. Oh, that's
And
amazing.
it is, yes. And my grandparents were living in that neighborhood. My great grandmother, my great aunts, my aunts were around. My father grew up in the house that was right next to the schoolyard of the school I went to. My mother's aunts were around the corner. I mean, we grew up in a neighborhood that my parents knew, and everybody knew us, so you
Wow.
couldn't get away with anything. But it was something very good about it in a strong community, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
I could reach out left, right, center. It didn't matter. I would find a family member. But I went to a Catholic high school, um, grade 1 to 8. I had a very good friend in 8th grade. I remember we were always competing. We were always at the top of our class. We were always competing for the awards. But 8th grade, this was the end of the school year, she asked me to walk with her somewhere. And I want to know, where are you going? She says, no, I want to go to the school, the high school I'm going to be going to. My plan was, of course, as my sisters, to go to the Archdiocesan High School, West Catholic Girls High School. In that high school, my sister had already planned what I was going to do. I was going to take piano lessons because I did piano by ear when I was a little girl, but my parents gave me lessons, but we had to stop when my mom got sick. So she wanted me to take the piano lessons, which would be free. I would be in the orchestra.
Oh,
She had planned it out. She's three
yes.
years older than me, right? But she had already decided. But my girlfriend, she said no, she had gotten a scholarship to this private high school. Now, this is going to give away my age because this was 1968.
Oh,
After
was this school integrated?
no,
Oh,
Dr.
okay.
King had been assassinated and the schools were opening up. It was a Catholic private school. It wasn't an do you know what an archdiocesan school is? It's the school. It's
No, I'm
like
not Catholic. I
if
know.
if you're Catholic and you go to Catholic school, there are the city high schools that you go to. There, it's almost like the public school. It's the main Catholic schools, and
Mm-hmm.
then you may have just very small fees to pay. Okay, but
Right.
then there are private schools, Catholic schools, that where you have to pay the tuition and everything else, and you have to apply to get in. The Catholic high schools, the archdiocesan or the diocesan high schools, they're automatic. You finish grade school, eighth grade, you automatically go to the high school. It's not an application
Right.
process.
Okay.
That's your next step. So this school was a private Catholic school that did not have any Black kids. There were a couple of Chinese kids in the school. Okay, and they lived on the main line, which is the suburbs of Philadelphia. And we went there together, and she was picking up a uniform because they were giving her a uniform. And they asked who I was. And I gave them my name, and they wanted to know, oh, do you do well in school? Okay, so obviously they contacted my school, and then they offered me a scholarship too.
Oh,
So we were the first two Blacks to integrate that high school. High school wasn't very big. It was only about 101 students.
wow.
There were only about 30 in my class.
So there were two black people and two Chinese people in this school, and everyone else was white. Is that?
Yes, and the Chinese people did not relate to us. Okay.
Mm, okay.
They were part of the upper class wealthy who lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Wow.
Now, in this high school was quite interesting because a lot of the students were wealthy. They came from the suburbs, but we also had some students from South Philadelphia that I have to tell you, whose families were part of the mafia.
Okay. All righty. Well, now.
Okay, but I won't go into more detail on that.
No,
But
you could say more on that if you didn't think it would get you in trouble or something.
no, it was a mix. But the whole point was white,
Mm-hmm.
primarily white, and the Asians. They were there. I don't know if they had problems. They didn't appear to have problems because they were wealthy Asians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, their parents were doctors,
Yeah.
things
Okay.
like that. I grew up in the city. So we came, and the school actually made special arrangements for us. You know, every freshman has a big sister who's a junior. Well, they had to have a special meeting to decide who would be our big sisters.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. But fortunately, my big sister was quite nice, and she was very supportive, and race issues never came into play. I played basketball in grade school and in high school. And I remember I was on a junior varsity and it was time to vote for captain. It never occurred to me to put myself forward. She's the one who came to me and said, Lynn, you need to nominate yourself and vote for yourself. It never occurred to me to do it, but she did it. Okay.
That's good.
But it was an interesting experience. My tuition was fully paid for. In fact, they gave us a uniform. It was a secondhand uniform. But, I saw this as, okay, this takes a little bit of financial weight off my parents.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Um, and I did have some positive experiences, But when I look back and I think about the enduring friendships that I developed, I didn't develop many enduring friendships that my sisters developed at West Catholic High School. Okay. And though I had friends when I was there, um, when we graduated, the people I thought who would stay in touch with me did not. We did have a class reunion back in 2007, and it was quite nice. And we were quite friendly with each other, and we talked about the positive things. But at the time, to be very frank, I wasn't considered very cool.
Mm.
I always kind of went my own way. That made people nervous. My girlfriend was more of a cool stuff because she used to write revolutionary poetry and stuff like that. And, the Black Panthers were big then. And they had a stereotype. It's not to say that my girlfriend was the stereotype, but they liked her persona more than mine. And in fact, people used to always ask me, Lynn, something wrong? Why aren't you smiling?
You were more
The
serious,
nuns would
probably.
ask me that too. But then after we got in, there more blacks came into the high school.
Wow, amazing.
Yes, but even with the blacks coming in after me, I was not well liked. I was accused one time of being an Uncle Tom, which really hurt me deeply because I couldn't understand it, because I wasn't in with any crowd in the school. So I don't know, maybe they were upset because I wasn't in with their crowd. I've always kind of gone it to a certain extent on my own because I found from very young that when you got in the cliques, I always found that I became the butt of
Mm.
whatever attacks that were going on. Even though my mouth was sealed, I never really indulged in a lot of gossiping and stuff. And so I often became the person who said, Did you know Lynn said this about you? And I'm thinking like, but I didn't say anything. I'm not saying anything. But no, but
Yeah.
it was an interesting experience. And my friend and I, we talked about the kind of guidance that we got throughout the high school. We were there, and I'm sure the nuns had best intentions. But when it came to going to university, and my girlfriend and I were in the top part of the class, we weren't in the bottom part, okay? We didn't really get very good counseling for university. And she wanted to be a lawyer. At that time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, except I knew I wanted to study other cultures, other countries, and I thought history, etc. I didn't know a whole lot.
Right.
Um, and I was good at sports, so they pushed me in that way into physical education. But Jackie wanted to be a lawyer, and they were always telling her along the way, "No, why don't you become a teacher? You can't be that." Well, Jackie's a lawyer. She had her own company, etc. Okay, but it's not because of support we got there. We didn't really get good guidance counseling. Okay, I think I would have gotten better guidance counseling at West Catholic Girls High School, maybe because of the size.
Mm.
But we the horizons were kept very narrow for us. I did have a French teacher who took a very special interest in me, Sister Jean Marie. I really liked her. A lot of the girls made fun of her because she wasn't cool, but she took a special interest in me, and we would talk quite a bit, and she would give me French tapes to take home.
Oh.
Though at the time I didn't tell her I didn't have a tape recorder. It was the kind of tapes with the spool. I didn't
Right.
have a tape recorder, but how could I tell her that? You know what I mean?
Yes.
But no, when I graduated, I went to Temple University, but I went to Temple because first thing my father didn't want me to go away to school. He wanted us to be home, very traditional, be home. And I did apply to physical education programs. And eventually I applied to Temple. I entered the physical education program, stayed in it for a semester and got out. And then I went into communications and then the Latin American Studies program, which was tremendous, which is where I met that mentor. I have to say, Dr. William Simonson, a very interesting man, very controversial. He was head of the Inter-American Studies Center. He was a child of American missionaries in Brazil. So he grew up in Brazil. And he created this program called the Latin American Studies semester program, where it was 8 to 5 every day. You had Spanish in the morning, drilling in Spanish, and in the afternoon, the area studies were in Spanish also. So our instructors were from all over the Latin America and Spain. Our instructors from Panama, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Spain,
Wow.
Colombia, etc.
How
And
many African American students
we're
were
in
in
that
this
program.
program? Yeah.
Well, actually, my best friends I met in that program. There were the twins, super tall. One's name was Cleopatra, and the other's name I can't remember. They were very tall. Then my friend. Then there was another one, Marilyn. And then I think there were 8 of us.
Wow, that's a
I think
lot.
there were 8 of us
That's a
in
lot.
that program. And there were 50 students, 55 students.
Okay, well, that's a
There were
lot
about,
of Black people, but not a
I
majority or
think there were 8.
something.
Let's maybe say 10.
Yeah.
But one woman, I don't know if she did well, because at the time she was also trying to pledge a sorority,
Mm.
AKAs. And she wasn't coming to class every day. In fact, Dr. Simonson asked me, what's wrong with her? What's going on with her? She's not coming to class. She doesn't seem. So I don't know if eventually she had to have flunked it. But what was amazing about Dr. Simonson was his commitment to the students. Part of this program was a study tour to Colombia. That's the first time I went to Colombia. It was a 14-day study tour.
Wow.
And I had work study, and I knew my parents had no money to give me. And I'm trying to figure out, how will I do this? And Dr. Simonson promised all of us that the cost of this program, he will make sure he gets scholarships and everything to make sure that everybody can go. I paid $155 to go to Colombia for 14 days. The only thing I had to pay for were some meals.
That's really great.
And he got us language scholarships. And we traveled with the Colombian consul in Philadelphia to Colombia.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and I was one of the selected students to present a gift to President Pastrana. I met President Pastrana of Colombia.
Wow. So you've been headed towards an international viewpoint from the very beginning.
I don't know. Initially, we were all supposed to have an audience with him, but he could not receive all 55. When we got there, we found out, and then Dr. Simon chose 4 people. I was among the 4 to present the president with the gift. That was quite an honor.
Yeah. Do you have any pictures from that?
No, because I have to tell you, my pictures got tossed somewhere along the way. All those pictures from Colombia. I won't give you the story behind that. No digital pictures.
Yeah. Okay.
All those pictures got tossed. But it was an amazing trip. And I went back the second year with the next year's program. That was for a month. And I took a course in Colombian literature then. And that was amazing too.
Well, your Spanish must be really good.
Well, not anymore, because it's been taken over by French. And now I'm not working in a Francophone country. I'm not, it's getting weak. I'm trying to pull it back up. But my Spanish is still there because I was in Cuba 2 years ago. And I met with someone there. I was hoping that eventually I could do some research with. It started in kind of English because he spoke some English, and then it went into total Spanish. So my Spanish actually came back.
Cool.
So
That's great.
It came back, yeah. But that trip to Colombia and Dr. William Simonson's influence had a tremendous impact on me. So when I graduated from Temple and thinking and looking for work and thinking about graduate school, I thought about the U.S. Information Agency, which doesn't exist now. It was brought into State Department as a section of the State Department, Information and Culture, et cetera. But at the time, the USIA was responsible for developing information programs, cultural programs, et cetera, for the US government. And because of my communication background, I thought that would suit me, and given the international work, I was just pleased. But at the time, of course, this is 1976, they had affirmative action programs. They had an affirmative action program to hire Blacks. You didn't have to take the Foreign Service exam to get in, but you'd have to take it within 5 years in order to get commissioned as a Foreign Service officer. I spoke to Dr. Simonson about it. He discouraged me. He said, Lynn, don't do it. Don't do it, Lynn. He said to me, because you're good enough to get in. And you don't want to have that stigma. He felt it would be a stigma over me with the other Foreign Service officers, that if I got in through this program and not having to take the Foreign Service exam.
Well, yeah, that's true.
And, whereas the affirmative action program was good for us, but I listened to him, okay? And I didn't go through because I had the first interview, I was called back for a second. And then I decided to go to graduate school. And he was a reference for me for graduate school, American University. I went into the master's program in international development.
Hmm.
And that led to other little jobs and then to USAID.
I find it kind of weird that an affirmative action program wouldn't make you take the civil service exam. Like it doesn't make sense.
You would have to take the Foreign Service exam within 5 years, because at the time, if you join State Department or USIA, within the 5-year period, you join at a certain ranking, but within that 5-year period, you have to be commissioned. If you don't meet the commissioning requirements, then your employment is finished. So within that 5 years, you would have to have taken and passed the Foreign Service exam.
Okay.
But I went on to graduate school, and USAID actually doesn't require the Foreign Service exam, though I've taken the Foreign Service exam. And what it does require is a master's degree and experience, and some experience. Whereas in State Department and the other foreign affairs agencies, it requires the Foreign Service exam if you're coming in at the entry level, but doesn't require a master's degree, just a bachelor's. USA requires a master's degree.
Yeah. So you got your degree in international development.
Yeah.
And then you went to USAID.
Well, not directly. It was a struggle getting from there. Let me see. I finished in 82. Now I say a struggle, it's a 2-year struggle, not very long. But I had internships along the way. And I have to tell you, I was a Congressional Black Caucus Fellow in the spring of 1980. I worked with the Congressional Black Caucus as a legislative intern in international affairs. And at the time I worked with a very close, it was a very good guy, Steve Horblitz, who was on the staff of Congressman Fauntleroy back then. And he really mentored me in such a positive way. He was so supportive. I'm in touch with him even now. We've caught back up again. But I had such good support from them. But I have to think about making shifts in your life. That was 81, spring, January to May, spring term of Congress. 1980, May of 1981, they called me and said they wanted to offer me a position as a legislative staff in international affairs for the Congressional Black Caucus. It was full-time work. My graduate program, I wasn't quite finished. I finished the following year, but my graduate program was an evening. All the courses on that program were in the evening after 5. But at the time, I was engaged, and I thought I was leaving the country. And that summer, I was supposed to go to that country so that we could kind of get things prepared for moving there the following year. And again, I made the decision, if that's what I'm supposed to do and this is my life, maybe I should not take this job, because the job required me to start right away.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. There's always
Angela,
choices.
there's some interesting twists and turns, and I want to go back a little further. When I finished Temple University, I tried to get a job in communications, and it took me a while. I finished in 76. I tried to get work. I actually had an I had an interview with TV5 in Washington, D.C. I was called back for a second interview. My father did not want me to leave Philadelphia. And he sent a message to my mom to say, if I have a home to live, you should come back home. So I didn't go for the second interview. Okay. But eventually I got the nerve. I love my father dearly, and it was all about protection. Okay. But actually, this road actually helped to make me more confident and strong, in fact, in terms of what I wanted to do. In fact, I didn't find a job right away, so I went to work on the railroad. I worked for
Oh,
Conrail for 2 years
wow.
in the movement office, where I tracked the movement of freight trains and their contents. I learned a lot about freight trains and tracks, railroad tracks and stuff. There was a supervisor who would take us out on field trips to go visit all the stations along the Northeast Corridor from Philadelphia to New York. And
Wow.
it was quite interesting. But eventually I was going to Washington every weekend to look for work. So finally I decided to make that, cut it off. I said, I'm quitting by this date. I'm going to take my vacation. I'm going to Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks, and I'm going to walk the pavement 9 to 5. I got some support from Temple University's career office. And out of those 2 weeks, I got 2 job offers.
Awesome.
Would you believe one was with the American Film Institute
Really?
in the
Doing what?
promotion office as a promotion assistant? And the other one was with the National Cable Television Association.
Wow.
And unfortunately, at the time, I let money speak because the money at AFI was like $3,000 less than the money for the National Cable Television Association. But I ended up leaving NCTA after 1 year due to discrimination. They were
Really?
not, no, it was, and they refused to give me my increase. And actually, I didn't realize that I had walked into a situation where a fellow employee had wanted the job, but due to affirmative action, they gave it to me. She was inside and wanting that promotion. And every step of the way, she was trying to sabotage everything I did, including my supervisor. So, these little struggles along. But the thing is, every twist takes you a different way. And it's not just those twists, it's what you decide to do with those twists and turns. It's not the twists and turns, it's what you
Right.
decide to do with them. I was in graduate school, so I continued. I had the Congressional Black Caucus fellowship thing with them. I worked for volunteers and technical assistants in an internship, and then trying to find professional work, which is kind of weird because I would have had a professional job if I took that legislative job at the Congressional Black Caucus. So in some ways, I went backwards because when I got my master's degree, I was doing administrative work after that, trying to find full-time professional employment until I got into USAID. So
Wow.
sometimes when we step backwards, it doesn't feel good because people would ask me, oh, what do you do? And you feel bad, right? But I've moved forward from there.
Yeah, you've definitely come a long way from
Yeah.
that point. Wow. You've had an amazing career, like an amazing life. Really.
Yeah.
Um, where do we go from here? Where you
Well,
so
well, actually, there's a little bit more.
okay.
After I left USAID in 2005, and I told you I got that graduate certificate in project management, I became a member of the Project Management Institute. Okay. It's a professional association. And when I came back to the SUTU, I got a mailer, an email saying that there was a research conference. I didn't even know there was project management research. So I went to that research conference in Montreal. And at that conference, there were some amazing presentations by academics from all over the world. But many of the academics were with a school in France called École Supérieure de Commerce, ESC Lille, um, business school. It's a business school. And I met quite a few people there that I really connected with. And one was a really great woman who is Canadian, who's at Athabasca University in Canada, Western Canada. And I decided, you know what? I want to investigate a doctoral program. So I communicated a lot with her, and she was guiding me on how to choose a program. I got in touch with the director of the program in Lille, ESC Lille, and he communicated with me for 6 months. It was amazing, his responses. Christophe Bredier, he's currently in Canada, but I would ask him questions and he would send back detailed responses. You know, a lot of times you don't expect that from people, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So he convinced me to apply to that program, and I did. I had very specific ideas coming out of the international development field concerning strategy and projects. A lot of it had to do with um, uh, the importance of adaptive strategy when you're working in projects, because you're working with multiple stakeholders and everyone brings their own strategic aims to the project. But then how does the project adapt and deal with that? Okay. One, I was looking at projects and working with project management and small business possible as a possibility. I had to present certain proposals for dissertation topics when I applied. I got accepted, and eventually my topic was on looking at how sustainable corporate sustainability or sustainable development strategy gets translated or incorporated into projects.
Well,
And this
that's
is, I'm
super
looking at that,
interesting.
yeah, looking at that in the business sector. Okay. So, but initially I had wanted to look at how adaptive strategy, I know this is getting a little technical, adaptive strategy and international development projects, okay, using theories from entrepreneurship and strategic management. But I couldn't get the cases that I wanted. And I had to eventually take a break in the program. And when I came back, I had been looking at the King Code in South Africa, which is the code of governance, included uh, sustainability reporting. So then I thought, okay, how does a corporation go from um, having a strategy on sustainability, and then when they plan to execute their projects in their business, how does that get incorporated into it? So that was my dissertation topic. So I finished that. And since then, it's been an amazing journey. I have amazing supervisors who have been very supportive. Currently on the international editorial board of the International Journal of Project Management. And I was president of the Project Management Institute South Africa chapter for 4 years. I just stepped down January this year. And I do present at conferences. I do have two published journal articles. I have 2 book chapters, and I'm working on some other stuff. And right now, I'm on the academic insight team for the Project Management Institute. And I organize our project management summit every year for the South Africa chapter. And
Wow.
this year, in case anyone's interested, the topic is the year of COVID-19, stories of project disruption, learning, and reimagining. It's 27th of March. So if you want to come, it's virtual.
Can anyone attend?
Anyone can attend. I have to say there is a small fee. We have to cover the cost. There is a small fee, but it's March 27th, which is 12 months anniversary of the lockdown date in South Africa.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's project management is something that does interest me. I worked in project management for, gosh, I don't know, like 15 years, and with IT projects. And yeah, you've talking to you in general has made me realize that I love project management more than anything. And honestly, in a certain way, it's how I conduct my life. I have projects, that things are little projects, even though, maybe they're just, other people wouldn't see them as projects, but like the election, that was a project for
That was
me.
yes,
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 that
yeah.
was a project.
The skills are
Definitely.
important, what this perspective I'm bringing, and it's growing um, across the project management field, especially now. When I was doing my dissertation and looking at the whole idea of adaptation and emergence in projects, it wasn't something that was readily accepted because people viewed projects, you conceive it, you plan it, you execute it, and you try to avoid any change. But
Hmm.
coming out of the international development field and working with multiple stakeholders, also working in an environment that is constantly changing, because development is about change.
Right.
It's constantly changing. So you always have to adjust. But oftentimes in the projects that were developed international development projects that I oversaw, or there was a tendency to want to keep to a track. And of course, people who sponsor these projects don't want to see changes. They see change as a negative thing. But if you realize from the beginning that if you're trying to make a change in a situation, from the very first input, the situation is changed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's continuous.
It's
Yes,
continuous change. So you
yes,
have to come up with an approach that enables you to manage this in a way that doesn't manage into chaos. You're moving towards your goal, but you have to have an approach that sometimes needs to be more adaptive. And
yes.
when I first started to do my dissertation and talk about strategy and projects, people looked at me and said, but mm-mm. But in the academic field, unless someone else has come out with something, it's very hard to convince people. So in 2008, an article came out that said, "What is project strategy?" And I walked around with that paper like a banner. It
Yeah.
was curled at the ends
Well,
because it said, "You see, there is such a thing as project strategy."
that's yes, I definitely believe that. And having worked in IT project management, if you don't change as new information becomes available, then you end up with things that don't work in the end.
Yeah.
So
And actually,
getting
has a tremendous impact on the project management field in general, Angela, because this whole agile approach that's iterative is now really into the other fields, not just IT. And especially now with COVID and all the disruption and stuff, people realize they have to adapt.
yes, slowly people realize they have to adapt. Yeah, it's very slow. Well, we've been on lockdown. I think we've been on lockdown since the beginning of March. Um, yeah, that's in Germany. I've I'll be glad when it's over.
Yeah, we all will be. Hopefully, when it's over, it will be a better world.
I hope so. I hope so. You've Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? I mean, you've led a fascinating life, and
Wow. Mhm.
um, you have succeeded not necessarily against the odds, but you took a path that a lot of women didn't take, and you were successful. Um, I think that's, I think, I think that more women should try to do things that are not on the beaten path, because even now there's a beaten path for women. Like, it's, even though it's possible that women are in science and all sorts of interesting fields, there's still kind of a beaten path that women sort of take. You don't just, I mean, women still are most of the teachers, librarians, that we're nurses. Like, we're still doing that, and it's not just African American women, it's
Mhm.
all women.
Mhm.
But I think that people should try
Mhm.
to look a little further.
Yeah.
and
But
and
I wouldn't say they should not, that they should go out of those fields. Um, but to know that whatever field you're in, you have the ability to expand it, to grow it, to to create a metamorphosis that takes it to make it more enriching for yourself, if that makes sense.
yes,
Because I don't know if I judge myself as so successful, because we set standards for ourselves. But I guess the judge of success is also knowing whether or not you feel you're making an impact where you want to make the impact. Um, my big thing now is, having worked all over the continent and living here, is kind of to put African Africans at the front of their own development. Not me personally put them, because they are at the front of their own development. So, but so often it's not viewed that way. It's viewed as outward in and not inward out. And there's so much capability, but so much is influenced by donors. And I think whether you're a nurse or a doctor or like Dr. King said, the best, this, a street cleaner, we want to be the best.
That's right.
We want to be the best at whatever we do. And if you feel that what you're doing, there's something else you can improve, we should go ahead and improve it. I've heard people tell me years ago when I said I was going to quit USA, oh, you can't do that. What about what about your retirement? Yeah, my retirement, yes. But the whole idea was you have a solid thing in front of you. Why would you leave it? But it really depends on what's in you, what it is you want to do. And I'm not saying to carelessly throw out everything that you've done. I'm not saying that. But if there's something in you, in your heart and in your spirit, and you can feel it, and I know we all can feel it sometimes, it's that hunger to do something differently. It doesn't mean you have to stop being the nurse, stop being the teacher, stop being whatever you're being at the time. But what it's telling you is you need to be doing something more with what you have, because we all can do more with what we have. And it means a constant learning. And I have two children, by the way. I have to bring that in, they'd kill me. My son is 27, he studied film, and my daughter is 22. She just graduated from Boston University last year with no graduation and finished off campus on an online program. So that was
Wow.
frustrating. She studied psychology. But now we live in a time, and this is very difficult, especially now that we're locked in, we have limited contact with people and very few influences to stimulate us. You have to find your own source in many ways of being stimulated to do
Yes.
bigger and better things, because they're not the people around you all the time suggesting you should do this, you should do that. But you should keep reaching out, and you should keep looking for new things to learn, whether you're 22 or you're 62 or 82, because the world is changing so fast.
Yes.
And just learning for learning's sake, even if you're not working, to keep your brain and your imagination bright, because it's with vision that we're able to move forward in better ways. I think sometimes we get so tied to what was that our brain gets so locked in that we can't imagine new possibilities. But the new possibilities are happening around us all the time because someone had the courage to step out of the ordinary and the accepted and do something that was not accepted.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
true. My husband has this, he's been saying it a lot lately, but he's like, every day I learn something new and that makes it a good day. So I agree
Yeah.
that you have to keep it, because you never know when you learn something, what it's going to do for you. You learn something today and you think, that's interesting. And then, 2 weeks from now, somebody says, do you know something about, this or that, and
Hmm.
there you go. You're off to the
Yeah.
races with something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the environment that I was born up in, and I honor my parents for this, and all of us honor our parents for this, all my family, was the importance of learning, continuous learning. My parents, my mother is a high school graduate, but she also had a scholarship to the Philadelphia College of Art.
Mm.
And I think might have been one of the few blacks or only blacks at the time. This was 1949, no,
Wow.
1949. She had a scholarship to the Philadelphia College of Art. She got married and she didn't take it. You couldn't be.
Yeah.
My mother
Yes.
drew a lot when we were growing up. She drew. We inherited, I believe, a lot of her creative ability, though we haven't practiced it and developed it as much. One of my sisters developed as an artist, but then she went into physical therapy. One might not see the connection, but actually there is, dealing with the body and stuff in an artistic sense in physical therapy. I have a brother who draws. My son draws. My daughter draws, though she doesn't believe she's artistic. Um, but there's things but in our home, there was always new stuff being brought to us. I mean, in a simple way, people who live in very limited resource environments can still introduce newness and this spirit of learning and desire of learning to their children. My father would bring home from the store fruits that we had never seen before. Okay. and bring them home and say, this, let's try this.
Yes.
Okay. Or go on a simple drive someplace to see something new. It's not that as a child I was able to travel the world, but we traveled outside of Philadelphia 10 miles or in a different neighborhood, or he would
Right.
bring home a different food or something that would spark your imagination to say, oh, what is this? And want to know more. And this desire to learn is so ingrained in our family. It is so ingrained, my brothers and sisters. And I don't think we will ever stop. And that's what keeps me excited and going. This constant desire to learn and to use that information and tweak it and twist it and configure it in different ways in my brain. Um, we need to
Yes.
pass that on to our children, because in the African American community, many times we are locked in to resource poor physical environments, but our brains don't have to be resource poor.
That's right.
And that is what's going to take us out and propel us to do things. Now, of course, we need people to feed into it, to tell us and help us and to support us. But the little things we can do for each other can make a huge difference.
Yes. Yes. I think what your family went on a drive outside of the city or to another neighborhood, it's always amazing to me that there's so many Americans, black and white, that never have left the area that they're from.
Mhm.
And sometimes I wonder, how is that even possible? So
You can get sucked in to what you know, and yeah, I think that's part of the problem in our country too. It's very simplistic, but if you could just cross the line.
yes, if you just open your mind up a little bit and just go see something that you've never seen before, it will
Mhm.
change you enough where the next time something interesting pops up, you're like, instead of being, I don't know if I want to do that, you're like, oh, I can't wait to see this other next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a small way to change your world for sure. That might have bigger consequences. Look at you, Lynn. You sat on your bed and imagined the world, and then you went out and, like, I'm not going to say conquered it, but you went out and became a part of it.
But you know what? I there are times when I tell myself, I am so blessed. Not everything is perfect, but I am living the life that I kind of imagined, you
Yeah.
know? Who gets to do that?
Yeah, not a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people. I'm so happy to talk to you today. This has been really great, and I hope that other people find it as inspirational as I did. I will continue to, keep up with you, Lynn. You're, yes, it's been so great to get to know you, and thank you so much for sharing your story. Um, Everybody have a wonderful Women's History Month, because women's history is American history too. So it's not just stories about men who did things. Women have been doing things from the very beginning of the founding of the United States, and that includes African American women. And you're one of our hidden figures. So thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much.
And
Thanks, Angela.
yes. And we will continue with our next episode. Hopefully our next episode will be with my mother, who
Oh, that would be wonderful.
she, despite the fact that she wasn't like working at NASA, she was a pioneer in the IT field in the 60s and 70s. So I want to get all my pioneer women documented. And thank you so much. And we'll see you for the next episode.
Thank you again. God bless.